first one. So whoever wants to take it, just go for it with the answer. And make sure we have really solid audio on both things. Okay, first question. Do tiny homes appreciate in value?
Do tiny homes appreciate in value? Well, that's a great question. It really does depend on who built them. So are they listed NADA? So are they going to hold their value? And if you're using them for vacation, nightly rental purposes, so investment, or if you're using them to live in. If someone's using it to live in, it is going to depreciate in value. If someone's using it as an investment and it is tied to a property, it's going to appreciate.
Okay, so that one was do tiny homes appreciate in value. The next one is do tiny homes depreciate in value?
Do tiny homes depreciate in value? So the answer is yes and no. If it's an investment property, it'll probably go up in value depending on where it's located. If it's used to like live in or for other purposes, it can depreciate. The good news is tiny homes never depreciate as quickly or as drastically as traditional RVs. They always tend to hold their value a lot better.
As long as it was built by a professional manufacturer that is listed in NADA and is RVIA certified, you're going to get that hold of value.
Okay, next question is buying a tiny house worth it?
It really does depend on the person. If you want paper thin walls, go for an RV. If you want a place that feels like a home that you can actually walk in without the whole place shaking, buy a tiny home.
Not to mention in 10, 20 years you can remodel a tiny house, and it's a bit harder to remodel an RV. They don't remodel as easily.
Not to mention it's a complete different type of electricity circuit as well versus AC and DC power and a lot of other stuff like that. There's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at buying a tiny home versus an RV.
Okay, what are the disadvantages of a tiny house?
What are the disadvantages of a tiny house? Some of the disadvantages of a tiny house have to do with their weight. Because they're a lot heavier, you tend to need like a bigger vehicle. Like for example, most of our tiny homes, we like to tow like the 18 footers or even the 24 footers with like at least a 3/4 ton. But the bigger ones, like sometimes even the 24 footers or 30 footers, you definitely want like a 1-ton truck. You're not going to be able to just use like your Ford F-150 or something. You're probably going to need something a little bigger for most tiny homes.
Yeah. But with weight value also comes quality, because the reason there's that extra weight is because we're not using paper thin materials to build walls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Robert, we can recover it.
Awesome. Oh, sorry.
Some other disadvantages are as portable as they are, they're not going to be quite as portable as an RV. Think of them as more like semi-portable. You're probably not going to want to be driving around every single day, but they're easy enough to move that you can move them from one location to another as much as you need.
And I would say a big disadvantage of a tiny home, if you're living in it and you have multiple children, I think space and availability of where the kids are going to actually play would be a downfall for me personally to live in a tiny home, because we do have 4 kids and they're all under 10. So they play a lot. So they would literally have to be outside all the time. And sometimes that's not possible if it's raining or winter time and stuff like that. So that could be a downside to a tiny home if you have lots of children.
Another downfall to tiny houses, or let's see, what were we talking about? Another disadvantage? Another disadvantage to tiny homes is the lack of places to put them. So there are becoming more and more places to put them as they've grown in popularity. But you are still going to have you kind of have to plan it out if you want a tiny home of where you're going to put it and make sure you can put it there. If it's built by an RV manufacturer like ourselves, you can put it anywhere RVs are allowed. If it's just built by someone in their backyard, then you're kind of a little bit more limited to where you can put them.
Yeah, and cities can actually ask you to remove it from the city because of safety standards.
Cool. Will you go just adjust that mic real quick? Yeah. Okay, the next one is going to be, retap it and see if it actually, there you go, it's working now, okay. Next one is, how well do tiny homes hold their value?
So how well does a tiny house hold their value? For us, in our business, we've been around for about 6 years now. We've only seen an appreciation of tiny home values. We have owners that come to us and ask us to resell their tiny homes for them. That is something we do. We do not charge for that feature. We just have a backup list of people that want tiny homes. So we just say, hey, this one just came available. Would you like to see it? Do you want pictures? Do you want more info? And then we connect them to the current owner, and they actually get more than what they paid for it.
And one of the reasons our tiny homes appreciate is we use really high quality materials, and we metal skirt the tiny house. Like, we use metal siding, and because of that, that siding is going to look just as good on year 1 as year 5 or even year 10. So all of our tiny homes tend to hold their value very well because of the materials we use.
Yeah, we also use metal framing as well. So we do kind of a mix of wood where you're going to want that sturdy areas like above your door frame or above your window frames. We do use the wood beams, but all the rest of the tiny home is actually metal.
Okay, how long do tiny homes last?
How long do tiny homes last? Really, it does depend on who built that tiny home and what their qualifications are, and if it was inspected, if they followed the codes and the safety regulations. If you go to the proper builder, your tiny home should last about 30 plus years, just like a regular home, because it is built with regular home materials. And good news about tiny homes, if it's built by the right person, you can actually go in and do a complete remodel just like you would a regular home.
Are tiny homes still popular in 2022?
Tiny homes are nuts in 2022. Tiny homes are not just popular, but they're exploding.
Yeah, we get calls, more and more calls every single day. We can't even keep up with the build.
We can't keep up. We have hundreds of people that are blowing up our phones, which is amazing. And I love talking to people. I'm definitely going to need to hire an assistant, which we're kind of in the process of doing. So yeah, we're excited about it.
So yeah, tiny homes in 2022 are doing great.
Doing awesome.
Is it cheaper to buy or build a tiny house?
Is it cheaper to buy or build a tiny home? That all depends on you, your manual labor, what your qualifications are with building, and where you're planning on putting it. If you already have land and a city that is allowing you to put a tiny home on your property, but not just put the tiny home on your property, but also build it on your property. A lot of people don't realize that they're not allowed to build a tiny home on their property, especially if it's on wheels, because it needs to be built in a manufacturing zone. Because once you put it on a trailer or you put it on wheels, it is now classified as a motor vehicle. So we get this question quite often where people will call us and say, hey, city just shut us down. We're not allowed to build on our property. We thought we were. Can you help us? The answer is no. Once you start the build process, we can no longer help you. So don't get in that situation. Call your city. Ask them before you build, please.
Jared, I'm going to have you actually scoot in just a little bit, and let's grab a soundbite for our Tiny Homes Popular.
We're going to turn the volume down.
We did not get one for that last
Okay,
time.
I also probably want to finish that question too.
Okay.
Because I went on a rant without finishing that. What was the actual question?
Is it cheaper to buy or build a tiny house?
Yeah. But I liked what I said.
It was great. I thought it was awesome.
But I didn't finish the question.
So just start talking. He can probably splice it together.
Okay.
Yeah, just go.
So one factor to think about too is how much your time is worth versus how much faster we can build it. So if it's going to take you 6 months to a year to build your tiny home, wouldn't it be a lot easier just to have us build it in only 4 weeks? It's really up to you.
Not to mention, you might pay $30,000 to $50,000 in materials when, you know, if you buy it from us, we can do a loan, and your payment might be really small, and you might not have to put very much money down.
Yeah. So really, it's just how valuable to you is your cash.
Okay. Next one is, why are people against tiny homes?
Why are people against tiny homes? Really, it's different for every person, but in my opinion, a lot of people are against tiny homes because the people that are building them in their backyard, they've fallen apart, they use scrap materials, and they're kind of crappy. And people are like, that's going to damage my home values. And you see this a lot, and that's why there's zoning laws and all these other things. They want to separate people, separate different incomes from other people, and I feel like that's completely asinine, in my opinion. I really don't believe in the whole separations of people. If you have a tiny home on your acre lot, awesome, right? As long as you're doing your own thing, it's not affecting me, who cares? It shouldn't affect my home value as long as it's safe and not going to burn down.
Cool. Let's do one 10-second cut, and then the next one's going to be, I'm just going to stop and start again. Next
She's
one is going to
sweating.
be, cheaper by,
You
why are
sweating?
people against tiny? What is the largest size a tiny house can be?
what is the largest size a tiny house can be? So that really depends. The largest size that we generally build is a 30-footer. And that's just because it's going to be a lot more towable. The bigger you go, the harder it is to tow, the harder it is to bring it places. We want ours to be portable, so that's why we chose 30 foot as our biggest. It's not saying that they can't be bigger than that. They definitely can. That's just a comfortable size that's still very movable.
Do tiny houses have air conditioning?
Do tiny houses have air conditioning? Yes, I would probably say almost all tiny homes have air conditioning. Our tiny homes generally have 12,000 BTU mini split systems, and those can cool an entire tiny home very well.
And heat as well.
And they do heat as well. So the answer is yes. I would say every good builder is going to put a tiny house or an AC and a heating system.
They're going to put a tiny house inside of a tiny house.
Okay. Do
Good.
tiny homes build equity?
Do tiny homes build equity? So the time your tiny home is going to build equity is if it's attached to a property or the tiny home market itself is going to go up in value. And that's when you're going to build equity in your tiny home. We have had several clients that resold tiny homes several years after living in them, and they actually profited off the deal. So yes, a tiny home can build equity, but it has to be attached to a property or the market has to be going up, and you have to have a good quality tiny home. You can't ask for more money with a tiny home that's falling apart after you lived in it for 4 or 5 years.
And another way that they can sell for more than you paid for it originally is if it's like an income rental. So if it's an income rental, it has a history of renting well, that's going to help it, sell for more because you can prove that this tiny home makes this kind of money every month.
Yeah. And then investors will see it as, oh my gosh, that is a low cost, low cash investment where I can get in and not have to put a lot of cash down, but it's already positive. So.
Okay. This is a variation of another one, but maybe we could just do a short answer to this one. What are the pros and cons of tiny houses? Maybe we could do like a quick list.
Yeah. Well, we did the cons, so you could just copy and paste the cons in there.
Yeah, so just give me something quick. What are the pros and cons of the tiny house and tiny house?
Do you want to do this one? Or do you want me to?
So what's the question?
What are the pros and cons of tiny houses?
What are the pros of tiny homes? So tiny homes have a lot of pros. One pro is that they are well built, so they're going to be built generally like a home, so they're going to last a lot longer. They're going to hold their value better. They are great for, if you want to put solar panels on or if you want to do upgrades. Because they're built like a home, it's a lot easier to do a lot of those upgrades. They're also easier to renovate, and they last a lot longer are some of the pros.
Yeah. Another really good pro that I like is no property taxes associated with a tiny home. You will still have property taxes if you're on an actual property, but not if you're in an RV park or something like that. You do have a lot less monthly expenses. Your bills go down, especially if you do off-grid packages like solar and stuff like that. So your bills are going to be cheaper. You're going to be more self-sufficient. You're going to want to be outside more because there's not a lot of inside living. So you're going to find yourself looking for things to do outside the home and not be a homebody as much.
And because it's smaller, you're going to have smaller maintenance costs, and you're not going to be able to buy as much stuff, which will also save you money.
That's actually great. I love that.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a small house and a tiny house?
I would say a huge difference. A tiny house is classified as a home that's under 400 square feet, whereas just a small house could be 1,000 square feet. So it is quite a bit big of a difference. A tiny house to me is on wheels. It's movable. It's portable. It's literally your little miniature tiny home that you drive everywhere with you. That's a tiny home to me, my version of a tiny home. Yeah, she's pulling my hair so hard. And my little baby ones too.
Do you want to switch?
No.
Okay.
You can pull my hair. Yes, you can pull my hair. But yeah.
So give me the question on that one. What is the difference between a small house and a tiny house?
Okay. What is the difference between a small house and a tiny house?
Okay. Next one is, are tiny houses good investments?
Are tiny houses good investments? The answer is absolutely yes. So out of all of the different types of investments you can buy, tiny homes perform at some of the highest levels. So there's yurts, there's tents, there's normal houses, there's all of these different types of investments. Tiny homes tend to do some of the best.
Yeah, so we've actually personally invested in a lot of different aspects in real estate, and tiny homes is where we found the best return on investment, especially because you can purchase them with a RV loan as long as the bank knows you're using it as an investment. You're not misleading any banks or anything like that. And we do have banks that do that. So as long as they know it's an investment property, you're only going to put maybe 30% down, but 30% on only a $70,000 tiny home, that's like nothing to get a nightly rental. So that's why we're saying tiny homes are the best, because with larger homes and other things like that, you're going to put a lot more cash down. So you're going to have to use a lot more of your capital. And the ROI is mostly based on like how much money you had to put down to start making money.
How profitable are tiny homes?
How profitable are tiny homes? So it does depend on your location, who built your tiny home, how well you decorate, all these things. But on average, most tiny homes are pulling in anywhere from $1,500 all the way up to $4,000 a month.
It really does depend on the management company, or if you're going to do it yourself as well. So if you have someone who's managing it for you, like we do for our clients, we charge 30%, whereas other management companies might charge more. We know our competitor charges 70%, so that's quite a bit big of a difference. So it really does depend on who you go with, what company you're using, and how it's all planning out.
Okay. Is it hard to finance a tiny home?
Absolutely not if you're going with a builder who's licensed, certified, and listed NADA. I think that's the biggest thing for banks, is if they're not listed NADA, and to be listed NADA, you have to be licensed and certified and all this other stuff, and have a manufacturing warehouse like we do. But once it's listed NADA, you're going to be able to get financing on them, because the bank will actually be able to look up the value of your tiny home. That's the biggest hurdle for most people, is banks don't know what they're worth. They don't know how to tell the value. So once the manufacturer actually legitimizes themselves and says, this is the value, banks have to go buy it.
And give me the question, is it hard to finance a tiny home?
Is it hard to finance a tiny home?
Okay. What credit score do I need to buy a tiny house?
So one of the largest banks that we work with right now, we're a preferred builder for them, is Liberty Bank of Utah. And as long as you have a credit score above 650, they'll lend on the tiny home for you. Now, every time your credit score goes up another bracket, you're going to get a lower interest rate. So the higher your credit, the lower your interest rate.
Should we?
Give me the question. What credit score do I need to buy a tiny house?
Okay. What credit score do you need to buy a tiny house? No. Yeah.
She didn't want me that time.
She's like, that's not what I wanted.
So,
What?
Why are people choosing to buy tiny houses?
Why are people choosing to buy tiny houses? I think a lot of it has to do with the culture starting to change. People are starting to realize they don't want to be as tied down. They don't want to be stuck in their big mortgage with all their big bills, and they're realizing that they don't want to be a slave to their things. And so a lot of, especially millennials, it's everybody, but millennials are a big group that are deciding, I'd rather just get a tiny house, be free, not have to work as hard or as much, and not be as tied down. And I think a lot of that's cultural. It's also because houses have gotten so expensive that they've priced out a lot of people, and so tiny houses kind of are a big dream for a lot of people.
Okay. How long does it take to build a tiny house?
So our company right now, we take about 4 to 6 weeks to build a tiny house.
And repeat the question for me.
How long does it take to build a tiny house?
Cool. This one's similar to another one, I think. Why are people choosing to buy tiny houses? I think we already
did that one. Yeah.
We did that one.
I went backwards. Sorry. Okay, forward. How much? Okay, this one. Just try this one. How much does a tiny? Just use this to launch into something. How much does a tiny house cost in Florida? Just
How much does a tiny home cost in Florida?
$200,000.
I would say it's going to be very similar throughout the nation, but like if you're going to buy a tiny house from the West Coast, it's probably going to be a little bit more than like the Midwest. And part of that has to do with labor costs, and part of it has to do with material costs and
Shipping.
all these other things. But if it does depend on where you're buying it from of how much it's going to cost.
Okay, how do you build a tiny house?
How do you build a tiny house? Wow, so that's a big question, but if you check out our website, we will definitely show you videos of us doing it.
How do tiny houses get electricity?
How do tiny houses get electricity? It really does depend on the type of tiny home you have, but if you have a tiny house on wheels, it's going to have a RV hookup just like a regular RV would do, or it's going to have a solar backup system. Ours actually have both. We have solar systems and RV systems.
And they can be 30 amp or 50 amp.
Yeah.
That's good. How are tiny houses heated?
How are tiny houses heated? So we've had several clients that wanted wood burning stoves and also mini split systems. So they do kind of a mixture of the two, but a mini split system is going to heat your tiny home so well you're not even going to need anything else.
How do you keep a tiny house warm or cool?
How do you keep a tiny house warm or cool? It really does depend on your insulation value and who built your tiny house. So when you're building a tiny house and you're going through a builder, whether that's us or somebody else, make sure that they really are taking those steps to insulate your tiny home well. Make sure they're using expanding foam to insulate all of the door frames, the window frames, all of the cracks along the ceiling and the floor joints, and make sure they're lining your trailer with metal. Don't let them give you a tiny home without a metal trailer on the bottom, because mice will get into your trailer and it'll be a whole fiasco. It'll be bad. But yeah, so as long as you're insulating your tiny home well, you're gonna heat and cool your tiny home great. You can use a mini Mr. Buddy heater if you don't have a heater installed in your tiny home. They're awesome. And for AC, we recommend a mini split system or a wall unit.
What is she doing? She's like, what is that then?
We're doing really good. I have 5 more. So how wide is a typical tiny house?
How wide is a typical tiny house? So if you're looking for a tiny house on wheels, that you do not need a permit to move down the road, because that's the difference. If you get a 10-foot wide tiny house, you're gonna need a permit anytime you wanna move that, and it's a huge ordeal to have to go through with the DMV. Or you can build a tiny home that's 8.5. It has to be under 8.5. So under 8.5 feet wide.
Okay. I have no context for this next question, so do with it whatever you want to. Are tiny houses successful?
Are tiny houses successful? If you're wondering if they're successful in making people feel free, are they successful in making people have another redo that question. I'm gonna redo that. Don't post that one.
So the question was,
are tiny houses successful?
are tiny houses successful?
I don't know, Jared. Are tiny houses successful? Successful? My tongue stopped working. Ellie thinks it's hilarious.
She's like,
uh-oh, our time is up.
It's so close.
Okay,
Almost there.
our tiny house is successful. I hope you used the entire clip because that was hilarious. Are tiny homes successful? Yes, they are successful in making people feel free. They're successful in making people feel like they have a movable home. They're successful in the fact that they make good money if you're using them as an investment property. They're little to no cash down if you get financing on them. You can only get financing if you have an approved builder and you're getting good builders. There's several of them out there. We're not the only ones. That's why I'm not just saying just use us, because that's not realistic. No, we're not going to be able to build tiny homes for everybody. I'd rather you get your tiny home in the right amount of time for you, and so it can be successful.
Okay. Let's do 2 more. These 2 are great questions too.
Okay.
I love these. So, who typically buys tiny houses, homes? Who typically buys tiny homes?
Who typically buys tiny homes? I would say college students, newlyweds, and newer investment people. Why is that light out? Ugh. Okay, redo that one too.
Who typically buys tiny homes?
Ellie.
Who does it?
Who does it? Okay, who typically buys tiny houses? I would say newlyweds, college students, and people who are looking for a low-cost investment, who are maybe new to the investment world, not quite ready to buy a huge house or a vacation nightly rental property that's going to be over $300,000. It's pretty expensive. They'd rather start with a lower cost, less risky investment by purchasing a tiny house.
I would say a lot of millennials buy them because they feel like the housing market's gotten so expensive.
Oh, you hear that? You just slap millennial right on out there, just like
And then
tagging people.
also
Just dang.
baby boomers as well, because they're starting to downsize. They don't want their big houses anymore. And a lot of, but you know what? Everybody loves tiny houses. I haven't found very few people that dislike tiny homes.
The only people I would say that don't like tiny homes are those really like weird old guys in the mall. Do you know what I mean? That are like walking down the mall, like, what's the difference between this and RV? And you're like, have you stood in an RV lately? You step in there and it's like a freaking earthquake. You step in a tiny home and it's like level, you're good. You don't even really feel it moving. It's
solid.
Sturdy. I can dig a hammer to an RV and get through your wall. You cannot get into that tiny house with a hammer. Case closed.
That's awesome. Okay, last one. Are people buying... Jared, move in just a little bit. We're scooting just a little bit. Okay.
Sorry,
Are people
I got
buying
aggressive.
tiny houses?
It's hot. Where's your band? Oh, she looked like I asked him to. See that face? You got to look back at that face because she's like, I'm sweating. It's hot in here.
Are
It's
people
hot.
buying tiny houses?
Are people buying tiny houses? What kind of question is that? Of course they're buying tiny houses. I wouldn't have a business if they weren't buying tiny houses. I love tiny houses, and I absolutely love everybody who built. That's all, folks.
Everyone who buys them. She loves everybody who buys them.
My tongue does not work after 4 o'clock. It is now, 5:30? So my tongue is out the door on vacation, not working anymore. I turned Southern.
All right. I don't think we repeated the last question, the one before that one. So just give me the who typically buys tiny houses.
don't
and I'll
lick
let
me.
you go.
Okay, who?
Who typically buys tiny houses?
Okay.
Allie.
All right, we'll let you go. We just went through like almost 40 questions, I think.
Sweet.
So we're gonna get.
I'm out.
Thank you.
Did you buy me coffee?
I didn't drink coffee.